we're talking about fall is for planting. Because there was a time when most people, you know, if you went to the garden center, because garden centers weren't that, there weren't that many of them around, then you would go in the spring because there was nothing there in the fall. But good news is now there are lots of plants at garden centers, and you can find all kinds of plants at this time of year. Some of them are on sale, woohoo! So, you know, you can take advantage of that. But it's also a good time to take a look at what's out there. Stuff that, you know, when people go shopping in the spring, they buy what looks good. So there's a saying, any fool can have a spring garden. That's because everybody buys with their eyes and they buy what looks good. And so everybody has the same stuff. Well, if you want to find out what looks good at other times of the year, guess what? You have to go at other times of the year. And right now is a great time to go. And it's a great time to add to your garden so that you can make your garden more interesting into the fall and into the winter. What? Winter? Who does gardens in the winter? Well, I'm here to tell you, winters around here are like, you know, by the time you take into account the shoulder seasons, are 6 months long. That's a long time. And I love the shuswap, but it really annoys me that I can't garden for that length of time. So what you do is you put stuff out there that looks good through that period. And that means that instead of having that great garden in the spring, you're also going to have a great garden in the summer, the fall, and the winter. So right now, you're going to find lots of plants that do well into the winter. And the thing is, they probably look like green blobs or sticks in the spring, and they did not attract your attention at all. But they probably look fabulous in the garden centers now. So now is a good time to take a look. Actually, before you do that, take a look around your garden. See what's missing. Go, you know, look with a critical eye and say, all right, I could use something that's about this big by this big that has this kind of color in the fall. And, you know, if it has flowers sometime other during the season, that's okay, but that's not the main criterion because you're looking for stuff that's going to look in the fall, good in the fall, and hopefully has something that'll carry it into the winter. So, I kind of went off on a tangent there, which I'm known for. I've had classes where I had this one fellow that would go, oh, it's Harriet. And he would say, she's the wind-up bunny. And he says, you start her up in the spring or, you know, at the beginning of the class and she's supposed to go blah, 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 for 2.5 hours and then the class is over. And then we do it again next week. So anyway, I haven't done this for a while. Between COVID and retiring, I've got a lot of pent-up excitement here, you know. This is pretty crazy. So anyway, we are going to talk about fall is for planting. And I do actually have some handouts, so if you didn't see them, they're at the ends. And you can help yourself to one, so you can make notes on it if you want, or most of the information is there, so that once you leave here, you'll have something to take with you. But the reason that I say fall is for planting is because there is so much that other than what's in the garden, that you can, you know, take advantage of right now, but it's also a way to spread out the labor. Everybody's busy in the spring, so why not do some stuff in the fall and just make it a little bit easier? So not only are you going to find some interesting things at garden centers this time of year, it could be on sale. That could be great. You're going to see a new palette of plants that you didn't really notice in the spring. And those are things that you can add to your garden. And you can spread out the workload so it's not going to be quite as onerous in the spring. So I have to move the mic just a tiny little bit so I can actually get to my computer. Okay. So I have to be careful to talk into the mic, so if you do not hear me, just, you know, put up your hand or do something like that. Hang on a second. Okay. There we go. Why plant in the fall? So, something that most people don't know is that because we're so gung-ho to plant in the spring, that isn't actually, for most plants, the best time to plant. The best time to plant is now. Started a couple of weeks ago, it's going on for a few more weeks, depends a lot on the weather, but the main thing is that you want to have soil temperatures fairly warm for hopefully 5 weeks after you plant, but at least 2 to 3, because soil temperatures at this year are warmer than they are in the spring. So here we are, used to planting in the spring, soil temperatures are cold. Plants are gung-ho to grow. Oil and air temperatures are starting to get warmer. So there's this huge part, that the plants are doing. They're trying to grow new leaves. And here we want them to grow roots, but the soil's cold. So they tend not to grow very many roots in the spring. Doesn't matter what you put on them, how much bone meal you put in there or how much transplanter you use. Until the soil's warmed up, they really don't grow very many roots. But the tops are growing. We want them to grow like gangbusters. That's actually really stressful for plants. Now, here we are, this time of year, soils are warm. As much as 80% of plants do their most of their root growing this time of year. New information? Yeah, it was for me too, and years ago. But I always kind of thought, okay, everybody plants in the spring. What's this? It's just all hype. You figured it's garden centers are wanting to sell off their plants, so that's why they go fall is for planting. Guess what? It's actually true. Fall is for planting. So air temperatures are getting cooler, particularly at night. Plants have shut down. They're not growing anymore. So because they're not growing and they're not, putting out all this leafy growth, and the roots are growing really well because the soils are warm, this is a perfect time to plant. Making sense? Okay. What are you doing here? You should be running to the garden centers. Seriously. So anyway, this is the time to do it. And this is the time to add to things in your garden. So if you've got a landscaping project coming up, oh, good on you, because you can really get some really neat stuff. But this is the time to be doing your planting. And the big thing that you can really get by planting in the fall is actually gaining an entire season. Because for most plants, as long as the soils are still warm and the tops are finished growing, those roots will continue to grow. So the plants can actually gain an entire growing year by planting now. So I've got a slide at the end that'll show that really well, how much better it is to plant now. So just making sure I haven't, forgotten anything, because my brain does tend to, you know what? I retired, right? All those things that used to be right there, they're not. And yeah, so I need notes now. So this is the time for the plants that you're looking for, plants that have berries on them. Fall blooming perennials and shrubs. Plants that have spectacular fall color. Plants with colorful evergreen foliage. We tend not to think of evergreens as being really super great plants. I have to tell you, I am a total fan of dwarf evergreens, something that they're not going to take over the whole back 40. But, some of those plants are just amazing, because in the winter, those 4 or 5 months when it's really yucky out, those evergreens carry the day. Plants that have colorful bark, plants that have berries that hold on during the winter. All of those things are things that you can put into your garden now. They'll get established and they will make a big difference to what your garden looks like. Now, the thing also about planting now is that when you plant at this time of year, next year, when we go through a heat period, those plants, because the roots are going to be more well established, will be better able to withstand heat. So that also is a big plus. So if you're growing perennials, putting in perennials, it's a great time. Of course, you go to the garden centers now, or any of the stores that bring in plants, they've got gazillions of potted mums. Most of those mums are not perennial. They're called hardy mums. Most of them are not perennial. Most of them are ones that have got such a background of different varieties of mums that have gone into their breeding that their actual hardiness is, a little questionable. And so lots of times people are really disappointed. They buy these mums in the fall, they were called hardy mums, and then they're dead the next spring. There are a few series of mums that are very hardy. The mammoth mums were developed for winter in Minnesota, so obviously it's pretty cold there, so they do well. They come back every year, so look for those, the mammoth series, or look for the Morden series that was developed in Canada for Morden, Manitoba. Also very, very hardy. And if you want to get mums that are going to come back year after year, those are the ones to look for. But there are many other asters, there are Kierangashomas, there are many other perennials that are in bloom this time of year that you can add to your garden. Now, something that you're going to find perennials that I absolutely love are Echinacea. And Echinaceas are sold this time of year because this is when they're in bloom. There's no point selling them first thing in the spring because they're potted dirt with maybe a leaf or two. People don't tend to buy those, especially not for the price that they ask. So they have to be sold when they're in bloom. But this is another plant with all the breeding that's gone on in the last 10, 15 years. There's quite a mixture in terms of their hardiness. So as a species, they're hardy to zone 3. As individual plants, they may not be. And people are losing them the first winter. So when you get any of the Echinaceas, yes, those, you want to make sure that you get them as early as you can in the fall. Give them as much time as you can in the fall to put down roots. I would say use root booster or transplanter, something like that, to get those roots growing because now the soils are warm. But you want to give them an extra boost, and that's exactly what the transplanter formula does, especially the one with the rooting hormone. And, get those plants established. And then, because their hardiness is a little questionable the first year, they're not going to need it in the future, but the first winter, give them extra winter protection. So put mulch on them, okay? Especially, you don't think you have to do it for Echinacea because they are really prairie hardy plants, but no, now you do. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're being planted late in the season, and their heritage now of these newer varieties is often with varieties, to get those really cool colors, they have to introduce some species that aren't as hardy as some of the others that we've had in the past. So, when to plant? Now, I did allude to this already. You want to do it when you have about 5 weeks. Perfect conditions, 5 weeks of reasonably warm soil conditions. You want your soil to be moist enough that you can work it up and have it in good tilth. That's one of those words that not everybody understands, but basically it means that it's not so wet that it ends up being great big clumps and not so dry that it's dust. So if you have to water it, that's good. You should be watering once you plant so that they're getting a good inch of water a week. But when you actually plant, make sure that you water deeply and thoroughly so that they're not having to struggle from the get-go. You want to make sure that they're really getting the water they need. Now, if you're going to use any fertilizers this time of year with anything, don't use nitrogen. Nitrogen, that's saying to the plant, okay, I want you to grow. I'm going to give you nitrogen because I want you to grow. Well, this time of year, you don't want anything growing. So if you have roses in your garden, then you should have stopped giving them nitrogen back there in the middle of July because they need to harden off. The big thing with some of the more tender plants in this area is that we keep asking them to perform, and I have people saying to me, I had roses at Christmas, and I'm going, yeah, and then what happened to them? Because at that point, if they were still producing, that means they were still in active growth. And then if we get a real cold shot, those plants are not going to be very happy. And in fact, that's where you're going to get a lot of winter damage. So let them harden off. And at this time of year, if you do have roses, if you're, if you like picking the roses or anything like that, I would say maybe pick a few. But for most of them, let them mature and let them produce hips. Because when plants produce seeds, that is nature's indicator that it's time to get ready for winter. So if you keep on cutting all the flowers off, or you're deadheading everything and you never allow them to produce hips, then they're not going to get ready for winter, which is also going to set them up for winter damage later. So for roses, again, you're not, we're not talking planting right now, but this is something where so many people have questions. I'm addressing it. Quit the nitrogen, middle of July. This time of year, go a little heavier in the phosphorus and particularly the potassium. Potassium is the nutrient that encourages plants to harden off. So if you've had a fire pit this summer out at the cabin, if you're lucky enough to have something like that, take some of those ashes and sprinkle it around your plant so that that potassium that's in there very quickly, it's very soluble, goes into the soil, and it helps the plants then to encourage them to harden off, which is what we want them to do this time of year. So, now the types of plants that you can grow. First off, we're going to talk about what not to plant. There are a few plants that really do not do well if you transplant them in the fall. So I marked them in your handout, so be sure to take a handout so that you know what they are. Because they may very well be on sale at the garden center, but that doesn't mean it's a good buy. Because if they're going to die because they really don't transplant well, then you don't want to buy it, okay? Now there are some plants that traditionally struggle a little bit, but there are some things that you can do to help them make it through the winter. One of them is to use a transplanter fertilizer so that you use no nitrogen but phosphorus and potassium so that you are encouraging with the nutrients that you're giving them to harden off. The other thing is with the roses, as I mentioned, you allow them to form seeds so that also, using nature's indicator for them to get ready for winter. And then use something like this is wilt-proof, and wilt-proof is like a moisturizer for plants. So for all of you who have ever used a moisturizer in any way, you know how it protects your skin. Well, here's a moisturizer for plants, in that when you put this on here, it's an organic wax coating, and it prevents moisture from being transpired as quickly as it would be under normal conditions. So, not winter, obviously, but this summer we had something happen, brand new house, you wouldn't expect it, but we had a flood in the corner of the basement. It meant that we had to dig out a bunch of plants. So I had a beautiful dogwood tree that I really did not want to lose, and it had to be lifted up. And so I sprayed the whole thing with wilt-proof, and other than some little brown crispy edges on the points of the leaves, it has made it through very well. I am relieved. Yes. When the builder said that he would dig out all the plants with the machine, I went, no. If I dug them out and they didn't survive, well, then it was on me. If the builder dug them out and they didn't survive, I would be a very unhappy character. So anyway, they have all survived. I am happy. And the wilt-proof made a huge difference. In the winter, for some things that are a little bit iffy, especially if it's a borderline hardy item, or say with broadleafed evergreens like rhododendrons, or with Japanese maples. Japanese maples don't have leaves in the winter, so that's not the issue, but their stems are so fine that they very quickly dry out in winds. And so in the early years when I was growing Japanese maples, they would grow a foot or two in the summer, and then they die back most of that, and then they'd grow a couple of feet the next winter and they'd die back, and I was just like, what is this? Realized it was the wind, And I thought, okay, there has to be a way to work with this. Put on the wilt proof. So that wilt proof is a wax coating that prevents the drying out, so the desiccation. So on a broad-leafed evergreen like rhododendrons, it prevents the leaves from being dried out. And on twiggy little plants like Japanese maples, it prevents the twigs from drying out. All of a sudden, my Japanese maples were growing, the 2 feet and not dying back. So eventually I actually got big Japanese maples. Oh, wonder of wonders. I was, really wondering if it could actually happen here. But yeah, that would be the trick. So this time of year, a little bit early yet, but depending on the year, sometimes you have to put the wilt proof on when a little bit earlier than you want, especially if it gets really cold early. But you want to put it on when daytime temperatures are above freezing, and if it is going to freeze, that it doesn't freeze very much, because this gets mixed with water, or if you get the ready to use, it has the water in it already. So it can freeze, and that can cause some damage on its own. So be careful with that. It has to be above freezing when you put it on. But the difference it makes is huge, and that's another job that you can add to your fall list of things to do. And if you have peach trees, or anything that's related to peaches, and you have problems with peach leaf curl, then Bordeaux. This is the time to be putting on your Bordeaux. So, people always get so freaked out when they see the peach leaf curl in the spring, and then they're really in despair when they find out that there's nothing they can do at the time. And so this is the time. This is when you want to put on your Bordeaux, which is a copper spray. So it's still considered part of an organic program. So time to plant. You've still got a couple of weeks, so you don't have to start the car and get out there right now, but the sooner you do it, the better, because we don't know how long we're going to keep this warmer weather. We can still have frost, and it's still going to be fine for planting, because the soils are going to be warmer much longer now than they ever were in the spring. It takes a long time for soils to warm up in the spring. So they've got that length of time. They're shutting down. The types of plants that, shrubs are great plants to do now because of the fact that they have stopped growing for the season. And so they're really good candidates. Many perennials are really good candidates. Evergreens, excellent candidates because they have finished growing for the season. And so now you can plant them, you can add them to your garden, and gain an entire growing season by doing this now. One type of plant that you do not want to plant now is bare root. So many times you can get plants bare root in the spring, and they really are better planted as early as possible in the spring than later in the season or into the fall. So once we get into really like November, then there are growers who will grow bare root fruit trees, because at that point they're completely dormant, and putting them in the ground isn't going to make any difference one way or the other. But I would say, as a general rule, you want to keep your bare root plants for planting in the spring only. So if you're going to be planting anything now, make sure that the roots are as intact as possible. If it's container grown, no problem. If it's balled in burlap, by now, because most of them have been harvested earlier in the season, they'll have grown a fair number of roots in the soil that's in that ball, so they'll be okay. If you're going to transplant anything out of your garden and move it from one spot to another, make sure that you get as good a root ball on there as you can. Because if you can do it so that the plant doesn't even know that you've moved it, that's a win. That's a big win. And then now is a good time to do it. And I have to tell you that there are lots of perennials that are better transplanted in the fall. As a rule of thumb, if a perennial or a shrub blooms, or grasses, if they bloom early in the season, so spring through to the end of June, then they're considered early season plants. They're great candidates for fall planting. If, however, they bloom later in the season, perennials that bloom later, or if you've got ornamental grasses that really only come into their own in the fall, or what else would there be? Perennial shrubs, if they're later blooming, they are better left until the following spring to transplant. Having said that, because rules are made to be broken, and I've broken all of them, I haven't lost many plants. So if this is the time you can do it, because you're probably going to be fine. To ensure, hi. It's nice to see people I know go by. To ensure success, I think I've covered most of it. Make sure that you've got as intact a root ball as you can. Also, plant as early as you can, but you've still got a few weeks, so don't stress it. Bulbs. I haven't talked about fall bulbs that you plant in the fall that bloom the following spring. Almost all of them, people will tell me, oh, I planted my tulips, I forgot to plant them in the fall. I planted them in a mild spell in the middle of February and they were fine. True. You can do this. You know what you can't do it with? Daffodils. I am here to tell you, I have lost hundreds and hundreds of daffodils because married to a fruit grower, at the end of the picking season, what we would do is we would make a trip down to the coast in order to try and regain some fall weather because, we kind of missed it during all the harvest stuff. And I would buy all these daffodils, envisioning this host of golden daffodils that would be my garden in the spring. And then there would be none because it would be the middle of November when I planted them. And daffodils, unlike other bulbs, have to root before it freezes. Yes. And you don't find that in reference books. I learned the hard way, and then I was reading a book by Brent and Becky Heath, and Becky, they're daffodil specialists in the United States, and she mentioned, and you should plant daffodils before it freezes because the roots have to be well established before we get into freezing weather. And I went, what? Well, that explains how I lost all those daffodils. And rather than being annoyed I was mildly annoyed, that I was still buying daffodils and nobody said this. But with daffodils, you want to plant them early. And you want to fertilize them in the fall. So most of the bulbs are, you plant them, you put some fertilizer in with them when you plant them, but basically from there on in, you're giving them fertilizer in the spring when they're in bloom, because that's when they're in active growth, the roots are taking up, that's when the roots are growing, and they are taking up the nutrients in order to give you the flowers for the following year. But daffodils, they need to root. So you give them fertilizer each fall. And give them something that's a good, multi-purpose fertilizer, something that's balanced, so that you're hitting all of the nutrient roots, and they will grow and be established for you so that they would bloom well in the spring. So make sure that you mulch as much as possible because it's going to help hold the moisture in, but also it'll keep the soil a little bit warmer and more even temperatures so that you don't go through that alternate freeze-thaw thing that you get often happening in the fall and in the spring, which can actually heave roots and such right out of the soil, which then causes death. And make sure that you go into the winter with lots of water. So this is a good time of year. Usually I like to force my plants into a drought at the end of August for the first couple of weeks of September. I just turn all the irrigation off, and there's been no water, so they're going through a tough time. But you know what it does? It forces them to harden off. So it's a way for them, if you keep things too lush, they don't harden up, you have more losses in the winter. So do that, but make sure, start your irrigation program again, usually, beginning of October, to the middle of October, the irrigation people are coming by and they're blowing out all the lines, so you lose your irrigation anyway. So what you have to do at that point is, if you've got plants like rhododendrons or anything that really needs extra water, you make sure those plants go into the wet water, into the winter well water. Evergreens, broadleaf evergreens, anything that's borderline hardy like roses, make sure that you water them well so that their tissues are turgid going into the winter. But now, a bit of tough love goes a long way. Just get them hardening off. And use antidesiccants where they're necessary. So, the wilt proof, this is a really good thing to have on in your garden cover. And I think I've covered most things, but one other thing I didn't talk about, if you have critters in your area, as in I am so blessed where we are now, we have an abundance of rats and voles and also pocket gophers. So make sure that you protect your shrubs and your trees, especially the newer ones where there isn't a hard bark, by putting tree wrap on them or making your own hardware cloth cages that you can put, fairly close, not a snug, but a close fit around the trunks so that they can't get at the bark and chew it off. Because they can do such a number in the winter that it's really heartbreaking to see some of the damage that they've done. And other than that, you've got all this stuff planted, you've done everything to try and make it through, you're going to have an amazing garden next year. The only other thing you can do is hope for a really good winter, either really mild or lots of snow. So that's it. And if you have any questions, I think James is around here too. Yes. So we decided, because we were babysitting our granddaughter, that we would share the questions. If anybody had any questions about tree fruits or anything like that, then I could do it, but I'll let him. And and if you've got any other questions, then we're happy to help you with both. Okay, James. Anybody have any questions? Yes. Okay, there's really only one major issue with dogwoods, and that's anthracnose. And that is a leaf issue, but usually it's spots on the leaves. And the Kuza dogwood, which has bracts, the flowers, what we call the flowers, the bracts are pointed as opposed to notched. So if you have the ones that are notched, then you have a Cornus florida variety, and those ones are very susceptible to the blight. And it could have been something like that. Chances are, actually, you could put on a copper spray this time of year, and that'll kill off a lot of the spores that are around. That would be preventative. I'm not saying for sure that is, what exactly you had, but, hopefully it would be somewhat preventative, because for many of those types of plants, oh, hello, I didn't even recognize you with your silver hair. See? Yeah. Oh, life is good as you get older. I'm just telling you. A former employee, yes, it's good to see. So yeah, I think that it was probably because it was so moist this spring. It was a fungal issue of some sort. So putting on a copper spray like the Bordeaux is not going to be a problem. And it could do a good thing. So let's hope for better weather next spring. Chances are your flower buds, it's a little bit late to do anything about it now. It might have helped if earlier on in the growing season if you had used a fertilizer that was higher in the second number. So if you went with, like a 5-15-5, which is the transplanter, or anything that's higher in the second number, the phosphorus, which is the second number, encourages more blooms. So it can often be used as a kickstart to get plants that are not blooming well to bloom better, because it could be rare, but it could be that you don't have enough phosphorus to get them blooming. Okay? Yeah. All right.
Two questions.
Oh.
Planting, how should you orient your rows for planting so that they are best with sunlight and or garden boxes?
Okay, the question is, if you're orienting your garden, which direction is the best way? And the other one was with garden boxes. Okay, undoubtedly, if you can go north-south, that's best. With rows. Because then your sun is going to be coming down. You're not going to be creating shade at any point. At the height of the day, when the sun is the strongest, then the sunlight is going to be going down the entire row. So that's going to hold true for boxes as well. But there you can play with it a little bit, because you can when you're growing a garden per se, like in rows for vegetables and fruits, their production is your main issue. When you're doing planters or boxes, it's flowering that is your main issue. So there you can choose your plants according to your growing conditions. So if you've got less sun, then you choose plants that are more shade tolerant. If you've got a situation where you've got sun and shade for planter boxes that you want to put the same things into, well, there are a few plants that will do both well. So you choose those plants. Geraniums will do both. The wax leaf begonias will do both. And there are many new cultivars in the wax leaf begonias that, they can go in full sun in bedding situations, and they do beautifully in almost total shade. So, those are plants to use in those situations, so that nobody has to know that you've got these very different growing situations, okay? If you have boxes on the west side of your home, so basically they're in shade during most of the day, and then they get hit by the full blast, then the only plants you can go with are plants that can handle that full blast of heat. So don't even think about putting shade lovers out there, or plants that are half and half. They are not going to do well. You have to look for things on the label that says it can stand the full heat of the sun, direct sun, in order for it to survive. Okay? No?
Second question.
Yeah. Yes.
Planting blueberries.
Okay. So did you acidify your soil before you planted?
I haven't done anything yet. We use the mothers for blueberries in the fall, so I'm going, okay, we need to make sure I also want to timing as far as
Okay, your timing, anytime now, because they will have finished growing for the season. But blueberries in this area are persnickety if you do not give them the soil acidity they require. Now, we tend to think that salmon are, we have slightly acidic soils here. That's not nearly enough. Our son works for a big agricultural company down the coast. He has a lot of blueberry growers as his clients. There, they are putting sulfur. They are acidifying their soils in Abbotsford because they're not acidic enough. Our soils are nowhere near acidic enough. So, up in the other garden, where the orchards were, my soil's acidity was 6.5. Neutral is 7. So 6.5 is slightly acidic, which is wonderful because everything likes growing at that level. Even plants that do better in more alkaline soil will grow at 6.5. Rhododendrons, blueberries, things that really like it acidic, they like it down at 4.5 to 5. Now, 7 down to 6. This is a logarithmic scale. So from 7, which is neutral, down to 6 is 10 times. Down to 5 is 10 times 10, not 20, 10 times 10. So we're looking at 100 times more acidic than what our soils are here naturally. what you have to do is use sulfur. So, sometimes people will say, oh, just to add some peat moss to the soil, because peat moss is naturally acidic. Well, yeah, but it's at the end of its decomposition process, which means it's a really good soil conditioner, but it's not going to do much for the pH or anything else in your soil. What you need is something that's going to get it down where you need it, and that means sulfur. And you need X amount for whatever kind of soil you have. So if you have a light soil, as in really sandy, then you need less of it than if you've got a clay soil. Because clay soil has really tiny particles that buffer. And what buffer means is they're hanging on to what they've got and they're not letting go. So they do not want to become acidic. Sometimes if you've got a heavy clay soil, you're better to make raised beds and putting soil in there. Rotted sawdust, excellent, because it takes a long time to break down, and when you add the sulfur to it, will stay acidic for a very long time. So if you can get rotted sawdust, that's an excellent conditioner. Peat moss is fine, but remember it's a conditioner. You're not getting nutrients from it, and you're not, it's not acidifying the soil to any degree. So you need the sulfur, and if you can get it in bulk, because then it's cheap. If you get it in the little containers, like for soil or for a fungicide, you're paying, that is not what you want. It's the same thing, but you do not want the ones in the little containers. You want the bulk, because we used to sell it in bulk, and it was like 69 cents a pound, and you could, so that's what you want, okay? You can if you want, because their growth is finished for the season. And so the main thing is, if this is a good time to prune a lot of things, you want to do it after the growing tip has hardened for the season. So August, middle of August onwards is a good time, but you want to do it before the leaves turn color and they're dropping. Because what the big advantage that you have to pruning now is that if you prune now, you're not going to get a big growth response next spring, which you do if you wait until the spring to do your pruning. So what you're going to do is you're going to make your plant smaller, which is what you want, without getting that big growth response next spring. But you're going to have to do it right away. Okay? All right. Oh, you're welcome. Yes.
Can you give them organic rock phosphate to help them grow?
Yeah, absolutely.
But do I have to wait now until the spring to apply it?
Because the buds have already formed for next year, chances are you're not going to influence a lot, but which is why you don't prune them now and you don't prune them early in the spring, because they're an early bloomer. And if you prune them in the spring, you're cutting off most of the flowers. My brother-in-law did that for years, and his wife got really upset with it because they didn't bloom. And I said, so when are you pruning? In the spring. And I'm going, oh, well, that would be the problem, because you're cutting all the flowers off. So remember that rule of thumb. If it blooms before the end of June, then you do not prune until after it's finished blooming. Okay? If you're going with the rock phosphate, I would go probably a good handful per plant. Yeah, not very scientific, but it works. And then once you get going with it, because phosphate stays in the soil for a long time, if you do it for a couple of years, you should be fine. But after that, you probably won't have to do it for years. Okay? Yes? How big is it? Okay. Yes? Yeah, I know. Yeah, we used to have that experience. So I would wait until they have lost all their leaves before you transplant them. Okay? And then get the biggest root ball that you can. Are you putting them into pots, or are you moving them to another spot? Yeah? Okay. it probably is better to wait until they've lost their leaves and they're dormant. And if you can give them some fertilizer at that point, you know, the no nitrogen but phosphorus, potassium, that, because our temperatures are still going to be good for a while, that can get those roots growing. But remember, now hardiness wise, have you had them in pots with the pots above ground before? And they've been okay? Okay, because, okay, yeah, I would say because they're borderline hardy here, you know, then it might be better if you're putting them in pots to bury them with the pot, you know, up to the rim for the winter, because then they're getting all of the warming influence of the warmer soil, whereas anything that you put in a pot should be at least one hardiness zone hardier than necessary. 2 is even better, because they're going to be exposed basically to prairie conditions in the winter, because that's two hardiness zones colder than what we have here. So think Calgary, zone 3. So that can be a little iffy. Okay. Well, you're taking a chance with it, and that's okay. You know, I'm just warning, if we get a nasty winter, it could be game over. Okay? Yeah? Fertilizing a cherry tree, what's the best time? Yeah. So James is saying probably now. And what would you use? Just nitrogen? Yeah, how much growth are you getting on the tree? Remember, this is an old established tree. I don't know if you want a lot of growth.
The biggest mistake people make with fruit trees is they leave the big wood. Your best fruit grows on wood that is on cherries is 2 or 3 years old. That's your best fruiting wood. So I would take a chainsaw if it's getting out of bounds and remove some big limbs, cut them back to some of the smaller ones, make it more compact. And if you do that, if you remove 30% of the tree, then there's a good chance you may not need to fertilize it this year. But okay. They last a long time in the ground, and I would never ever use a spike on a fruit tree, because you have no control over the release of that nutrient, and you can really mess things up. Anyway, yeah, right. Most fruit trees, the only nutrient you would really need is nitrogen, and you would only use it if you need more vigor in the tree. Yes. Black hole traps work really well. Buckerfield has them. They are a piece of black ABC pipe with a cover on one end with a hole in it. Are you familiar with them? Oh, okay. This one mimics their tunnel. And the little hole they think is the end of the tunnel, and they run into a thing that flips the latch, and a cable catches them around the middle and kills them. they work amazingly well. Yes. Right. As a homeowner, trapping them is probably the best method. And right. Maybe you can talk to Growers Supply and get some bait, and then you just probe it around the mounds of dirt, like 2 or 3 feet out. Find the tunnel and drop bait in. And I'm not, if you can find a bait that you're able to get. Because generally it's applicators that can get the good stuff, but trapping is really the only available method for homeowners. We've also had limited success using peanut butter and mixing crushed vitamin D in peanut butter. That rodents, particularly the ones underground, stay underground because they can't be out in the sun, because their vitamin D levels get poisonous if they're out in the sun. So that's why they're living underground. So if you overdose them with vitamin D, that will get them. Yeah. So peanut butter mixed with vitamin D and maybe some rolled oats, and make little balls, freeze them, and then they're easy to drop in the holes. Anyway, that may work. But you have to do something. That might be a, yeah, it is a problem. We've got 10 acres of field around us, and 2 acres of it, the guy hasn't mowed it for 2 years, and it is just full of rodents and keep coming in. So keep the area around your seedlings clean. Don't have any grass 2 feet either side of them. Keep the dirt worked up so it's nice and clean. The roots of grass and stuff will draw them into your plants as well. So if there's a no vegetation area with no roots, then that will tend to keep them away from your seedlings as well. So cleanliness is the next best thing after trapping. Like if you have got a weedy orchard or unkept grass that's high, so predators can't find these rodents and what have you, then it just builds a problem. So try to stay clean. Pruning a plum tree, if it is really growing too vigorously, you can prune a plum tree now, and that will reduce the vigor. But again, on plums and soft fruits, the plums tend to grow on the branches that grew this year, so next year they will have fruit on them. And the best fruit again is on the young trees. So when you're pruning, take out the older wood and leave the younger wood when you're pruning. Try to encourage new wood, and is we have a 1/3 to half rule. So the main branch, if the side branch off a main branch is half the size of the main branch, it's time for it to be removed. So the main branch stays the main branch, basically trunk. Yeah. So and you should. So on the trunk of the fruit tree, it will go from the large size at the bottom up to nothing on the top, right? So the size of your limbs coming off of that are larger on the bottom, and they get smaller as you go up. And it's maintain that half to 1/3 the size of the main branch. If it's more than half to 1/3 to half the size, you got to start looking at taking it off and finding a replacement branch to replace that. So don't keep old wood on fruit trees. Yeah, the one coming off the main trunk shouldn't be more than 1/3 to half the size of the main trunk. Other questions? Good show, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
So I've got some trees out
Uh-huh.
they're just in containers. So I've got aronia and some bushes, like berry bushes.
Yeah.
And also chestnut trees and some other berry trees basically. Is that what the time?
Now is a great time, yeah. And containerized plants, again, you can plant a containerized plant any time of the year, but the root growth and the roots going into the soil, now is the best time, because you'll get that root growth and they'll get established over the winter. If the ground doesn't freeze, those roots will continue to grow all winter, quite possibly. If we get a good snow cover, yeah, they'll keep going and be establishing your plant.
So this sounds like one of the few times in my life where procrastination is pretty well.
Yes. Right. Thank you. Have fun.
Thank you so much for coming today. Thank you very much for attending and listening and asking questions and being engaged and involved. We appreciate it. So that's the last for today here at the Urban Agriculture Series. Tomorrow, there is an entire other realm of talks going to be taking place here on the stage. Everything to do with like the 101 of what to do. We have, if you are interested in having kids or grandkids, any kids in general that want to get involved with 4-H, there will be the leader here, Joy DeVoe. She's going to speak about how to get kids involved. We are going to have Afke Zonderland again talking about fermentation 101. We have a presentation on backyard chickens from local experts. What else do we got? I can't remember all of them at the moment, but we do have a forum right here by the sandwich board, and so there's going to be an entire series of talks tomorrow too. They are going to be recorded. They are going to be on Buckerfield's TV in a couple of weeks, so if you weren't able to make it, you will be able to watch them again. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the parade or fair today.